I'm going to go live here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are live from the Shul of Bozeman, from the Chabad Lubavitch Center for Jewish Life and Learning. I'm just going to take a moment to share this on social media, and we will get going. So I'll give everyone a moment to join and jump on. See if Facebook behaves. You know, they've had their issues recently, so I hope they don't have issues today. Okay, let's share that here. Share it to a page. One day, I told you, one day we're going to have a tech team that will take care of all this, and I'll just sit and give classes. It's going to happen. A lot of crazier things have happened. Right, Mendel? Just confirming.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just share this one more place. We're going to have a lot of fun in today's parsha.
Let Mendel show his face.
Manny's in the playroom, and he's not going to show his face anymore. But if you want after class, I can show you his face for as long as you want. Okay. Let me let Karen in, Kayla Gittel. Okay, everyone's muted, or almost. I'm going to mute you. There we go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to those watching on Zoom. Good evening to those watching on Facebook. Good evening to those here in person, to Chaya and to Dr. Lifson, all the way straight from Dillon, coming in hot. What do you say? Coming in hot. To Jennifer and to Mendel. And it's Parshas Lech Lecha. It's the portion that started it all. And I know that sounds like a loaded statement, but Lech Lecha is when the first Jew comes into the picture. So the first two Torah portions of Bereshis and Lech, we deal with Adam and Eve, we deal with Noah, we deal with the flood, we deal with other things, but we don't deal with Jews. What's our line? What's with all the Jews? Right? Where do the Jews come in? The Jews come in Parshas Lech Lecha. We are now introduced to the first Jew, and the first Jew is Avram Avinu Abraham and his wife Sarah. So Abraham discovers God. There's a whole beautiful Medrash tells us how Abraham was he was lost like everyone else in his generation. It was a pagan world. There was idolatry of all different forms, paganism, witchcraft, you name it. That's what the world, the occult was very common. And what does he do? He goes out and he looks at the stars and he looks at the sky and he looks at the moon, he looks at the sun. He goes, something's fishy. This didn't happen by these, in Yiddish, we call them getchkes, right? That's what Chaya and I, and probably Mendel grew up with that term, getchkes. Getchkes is the fancy English word is idols. So he comes into his father's shop and he has all these idols. And one day his father asks him to stay in the shop and he busts up a bunch of them with axes. And then when his father comes in, he had the axe put in one idol. And his father said to him, why'd you do this? And he said, me? The idols did it to each other. And his father said, that can't be. They don't move. So he said, yeah, my point exactly. So here you have Abraham, a guy standing up against the world alone. He eventually marries Sarah. Together they are a powerhouse, a power force, a power couple that is changing the reality in the world from a world of paganism to a world of monotheism, to belief in one God. And they have this big struggle. Big struggle is that they struggle with infertility. And so at the end of this week's Torah portion, at the end of Lech Lecha, Hagar comes into the picture. So there's a maidservant, Hagar, she's an Egyptian princess. She works for Abraham and Sarah says, why don't you take Hagar and marry her? And but those days, polygamy was okay, especially if it was a concubine. It's beyond the scope of this class to discuss the difference in a spouse, a wife, and a concubine, but suffice it to say, there wasn't much difference as it relates to practicality. Maybe legally there was differences, but practically there wasn't much. And he marries Hagar, they have a child Ishmael, and it doesn't go well. And here we come to the end of our parsha. What happens at the end of our parsha is fascinating because it's right at the very end, verse 24, where it says Maftir. Abraham was 99 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised. Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he had the flesh of his foreskin circumcised, and that very day Abraham was circumcised, and so was Ishmael, his son, and all the people of his household, those born in his house and those bought with money from foreigners were circumcised with them. So Abraham circumcises not only himself at the age of 99, but his son Ishmael was 13 years old. And if for those that you remember, have been around long enough, we had a long class once explaining why Judaism, the Jews, are the descendants of Isaac, who had circumcision at 8 days old, specifically, and not Ishmael, who had a circumcision by choice when he was 13 years old. There's a big difference between doing it by choice and doing it because God said so. And the foundation of Judaism cannot be based on someone's own choice. It has to be based on a deep covenant that exists between a child that's beyond logic and beyond what the rational mind could understand. And so basically God said to Abraham at 99 years old, go circumcise yourself. And he does it the same day. And he takes the 318 individuals who were working for him, his servants, his employees, and he circumcised them all on the same day. It was quite the circumcision celebration. 318 plus Isaac, plus Ishmael, his 13-year-old son, and himself are all circumcised on that day. And then we begin. I want you to turn for a moment, even though it's next week's Parsha, because it's really a continuation, just one verse on page 91. The next week's Parsha begins as a continuation with the words, God appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre 3 days after his circumcision while he was sitting at the entrance of the tent looking for a passerby to welcome the heat of the day. So remember, after the circumcision, Abraham wants to do what he always does. What does Abraham do every night before dinner? He sits outside his tent waiting to see if someone comes by so he couldn't imagine having dinner with his wife Sarah and his family and his operation if he didn't have guests. So he used to wait outside his tent, but because he was ailing, he was in pain, he was suffering from the circumcision, which is understandable. He's 99 years old. And even though he lived till 175, 99 is 99. So he's sitting out. So God wants to make it easy for him. So on the most challenging day, if you wish, which was the third day, something that Mick, you as an OBGYN, has mentioned that medically it's proven that the third day is the most risky day from a health perspective, which is interesting how it fits exactly with what the Torah said. The Torah said it 3,300 years ago about a story that happened 4,000 years ago, that on the third day it was the most complicated. But Avram Avinu, Abraham gets a visitor. Who's the visitor? God. Why? Because Abraham sees that it's the third day. It's a day that God didn't want him to have any guests. Why not have any guests? Because let the poor guy rest. What's he doing? So God made it an incredibly hot day. He made it like an Arizona day. A day that nobody wants to be outside. It was incredible. It says God took the sun out of its shield and the world was boiling hot, but he goes out anyhow to the front of his tent. So God says, oh God, I got to go visit him. This incredible mitzvah of visiting the sick. It's one of the places we learn that visiting the sick is something, if it's worthy of God visiting Abraham, then visiting the sick is such a powerful mitzvah. And I have to tell you, America, we've gotten better with balloons and flowers and cards. But the idea of finding out that someone's not feeling well and just visiting them and taking into consideration the power that has to actually not only to be there for them, but the healing powers of visiting the sick. So often we talk about visiting the sick. People say, sure, I'm so glad I was able to stop by and bring them a little dinner, send them a bouquet of flowers, write them a card, which is all important. The healing powers of having someone care enough about you to come visit you. That's why there's a whole debate in Halacha, a very interesting debate as a side note, about whether you can fulfill the mitzvah of Bikur Chaylim of visiting the sick, even if you don't say a word, you don't utter a word, you're just being there. You hold their hand, you sit next to them, right? Why should I visit the sick? They're not even really conscious, they don't really know what's going on, right? Take some extreme examples. Visiting the sick, Bikur Chaylim, is one of the most powerful mitzvahs. It's actually one of the mitzvahs mentioned as a sign of the compassion of a Jew, right? A levaya, which is escorting a dead person to burial, hachnasas kala, ensuring that a bride has the finances and the joy to get married. And Bikur Chaylim, we say it every morning, right? Every morning in davening. Is that a siddur? No, it should have it anyhow. It's a machzor. It says in the siddur every day. Let me just pull it up here so I don't make it up. But we say every day in the morning prayers, right before we even daven, in brachot, we say, these are the mitzvahs, right? That a person enjoys the fruits in this world and the principle remains for the world to come. Meaning you get rewarded in this world and in the world to come. And what are they? Honoring your father and mother, giving free loans, interest-free loans, getting up early to go to shul and staying late at night, being hospitable to guests, Bikur Chaylim, visiting the sick. And then he says, the bride and escorting a person. It's an incredible mitzvah. And you fulfill the mitzvah even if you don't. There's a famous story with the Ksav Sofer, the famous son of the Ksav Sofer in Slovakia, where the Reb Shimon Wolf Rothschild, the famous Rothschild family, not the one that they talk about today, all the conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds running the world. The original Orthodox, observant, Torah-observant, wonderful Jew, Reb Shimon Wolf Rothschild, who was the original Rothschild, a wonderful, devoted Jew. But he was also a minister in many governments. He was a very powerful, wealthy person. And he came to visit the Ksav Sofer when he was in Maraban, when he was in those hot baths where they go, the salty hot baths where they go for healing. And he came to visit him. And he didn't stay long because he didn't want to stay long. And they had a whole discussion about how even if you don't stay long, you fulfill the mitzvah. It's also fascinating that in Krakow in the 16th century, in the 1500s, there was a rabbi in Krakow, Nata Shapiro. He wrote a sefer called Medrash Talpios. When I saw this, I thought maybe the guy wrote it 2 weeks ago, but he wrote it 400 years ago. What did he write? He wrote, what happens when there's a plague, when there's a virus that people are catching from each other, and how do you fulfill the mitzvah of Bikur Chaylim? How do you fulfill the mitzvah of visiting the sick when there's a plague and it's contagious? 400 years ago. So he says, from here we learn, and he quotes a story of different places in biblical sources, that you can fulfill the mitzvah by doing a hit and run. Right? By coming in, visiting the person and keep walking. Don't stop. And he says, if you don't stop for long enough, you won't catch whatever they have. And it's funny because today we talk about 6 feet and about if you're outside and if you're just walking by and you don't have 15 minutes. And all the drushes that we talk about today from all the health experts, it's literally written in the Medrash Talpios. He says, Vani kibalti miraboisai, I received from my masters, from my teachers, shamavakir is choli amageva, those that visit, those that are sick from a plague, lo yeshav, don't sit. Stand the walk back and forth, and if you walk back and forth, the angel of death won't get a hold of you. He says, Malach HaMavos won't get you. Why? You're doing the mitzvah visiting the sick, but you won't have a worry of getting contagious. 1600s. For all those that think they're revolutionary in the CDC, the revolutions come. I'll give you a list. That's just a side note. But anyhow, so this mitzvah of Bikur Chaylim is fascinating. So Avraham Avinu, at 99 years old, by the way, there's a famous story. And I say famous because I've shared it multiple times myself, but I'm going to share it anyhow. The fifth Chabad Rebbe of Shalom Dov Ber, who passed away in 1920. He lived at the end of his life. He lived in Rostov in southern Russia. And, most people know of Sochi, but Sochi is actually a small place compared to the bigger city in that region on the, I think it's on the not the Danube, on the Don River. On the Don River is a city called Rostov. It's the third largest city in Russia. And in Rostov, that's where the Rebbe Rashab went, and that's where he passed away, and that's where he's buried. The Rebbe Rashab had a story that, I think it was the Rebbe Rashab, when he was a child, he came home and he was crying. He said, what are you crying? His grandfather said to him, what are you crying? He said, because I learned in school that God revealed himself to Abraham. How come God doesn't reveal himself to me? Can you imagine a child crying from something so pure, something so innocent? What do we cry about today? You didn't let me watch the video, Xbox. You didn't buy me a car. You didn't buy me the candy. I don't know what else. What do they complain about today? Parents are mean because fill in the blanks, Ty? No, you don't want to do that live? Okay, we'll catch up on that later. But he came home crying. Why didn't God show himself to me? So his grandfather told him, when a Jew that's 99 years old agrees instantly to circumcise himself, creating an eternal bond between him and the Jewish people that are going to continue, that there's going to be a physical imprint on every Jewish male for all eternity, that they are a member of Klal Yisrael, a member of the Jewish people. He's ready to do that at 99 without hesitation. He earned God's revelation. You want to earn God's revelation? Do the work. Don't show up here and, I want God's revelation because I sat on a mountaintop and I went like this, like the finger, and I inhaled like my guru told me, and I want to see God. Too bad. You want to see God, you got to do more than just inhale and do breaths and stand with your fingers. And by the way, don't get me wrong, I'm impressed with those people because I can't sit for so long looking at nothing. But that Judaism, you need more than that. Meditation's good. Inhaling, inhala, exhala is fantastic. But the bottom line, you got to do what God wants, even when it hurts, and that's the point here. Because I'm going to bring up a very important question about this whole God visitation program. You had a little insight, Nick, because of a previous class, but the $1 million question is, why did God wait for the third day? Now, you could answer that God didn't wait for the third day, that on the first day when Abraham actually circumcised himself, God was there with him. One medrash says that God actually helped him circumcise. Okay, so he was there. So obviously he was there. He visited the sick. But why not the second day? So there are those that say that the most dangerous days are the first and the second. But who says visiting the sick is only when they're in danger? So maybe you're right. Maybe the more dangerous day, even medically, is the third day. But why couldn't God visit him on the second? So what if he wasn't in danger? The man's sick. He had a circumcision. That procedure didn't go away. Come visit him on the second day. So there's various commentators. Rabbeinu Nissim, the great, his name is Rabbeinu Nissim of Gerona. He was a 14th century Sephardic rabbi in Gerona, Spain. He was known as Reb Nissim Giridona because he was from Gerona. They had his nickname for him. So the Ran says that Abraham was busy on the second. There was a busy program. He circumcised 318 people. So the first day was he circumcised, and the second day he's running an operation. It's like a hospital. On the third day, things quieted down a little bit. So God said, I'll go visit him then. But all of that doesn't make sense because we're talking about God. All these issues are not really relevant when you're dealing with God, the creator of heaven and earth, infinite God who can do whatever he wants. Which is the same reason why, the Ur HaChaim, the great Ur HaChaim HaKadosh from the 17th century, the Ur HaChaim says, you know why God didn't come till the third day? Because generally there's a rule that why are close relatives allowed to visit the sick right away and people that are not such close relatives are supposed to wait a little bit? That's a general in halacha, in Jewish law. It says same thing, by the way, with visiting a mourner's house. Unless you're really close to the people mourning, you're not supposed to come right away. You're supposed to come a few days later. The 7 days of Shiva, don't be the first guy to show up. Let the family digest a little bit, right? But why did they come? So when it comes to Bikur Chayil and visiting the sick, why does it say that outsiders shouldn't come and only closer people? Because if closer people come, it looks like a regular house. The relatives are coming in and out, right? It doesn't look like something special is going on here, so it won't create a big stir in the city that someone's sick. But if outsiders start showing up, then the rumors start spreading that this person's sick, and it's too much for the ill person to handle when the whole city's talking about it. So give that some time. So even though God is considered close to every human being, especially to every Jew, so you think that if God showed up to Abraham on day 1 or 2, it wouldn't be a problem but the Ur HaChaim says he didn't do it because he didn't want to. If God shows up, it's going to make a lot of noise. But the Rebbe says that makes no sense. This is a talk these ideas are a talk the Rebbe gave in 1965. Or I guess in the fall of 1964. He says, what do you mean? If God wanted to come anonymously, he could have done that too. It didn't have to turn into a world story unless there's a specific reason why God did not want to come until the third day that has nothing to do with keeping the rumors quiet and has nothing to do with how sick Abraham was or wasn't. It was a concern about something else. And this is what the Rebbe addresses, and it's powerful. It's powerful because it takes us to the foundation of our perspective as Jews about Torah observance, about Judaism. Sure. Come. Everyone wants to see you. I'll show your face, and then I'll give it to you. This is Manny. Manny's mommy's not in town today, so Manny schlepped to the new shul with me for class, but he's seeing stars. Mendel, can you just help him? He just wants to go in my car and he'll tell you what he wants to do. He has permission. No. That's fine. He has a good idea. He'll be fine. So this is the idea that the Rebbe introduced, and it's so strong because it really guides each of us in how we are to serve God too. The Rebbe says that if you look back before the giving of the Torah, which our Torah portion, the story of Abraham and Sarah, is way before the Torah was given, right? We still have Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and then Jacob's 12 tribes, and eventually Joseph goes to Egypt and Joseph has children. Eventually, we got a while. It's way before. Before the Torah was given, there was no such concept of a mitzvah. There was no such concept of taking a physical object and turning it into something holy. When our forefathers, when our matriarchs and patriarchs did mitzvahs, when they connected with God, at that time, what a mitzvah meant was that you're doing a holy or spiritual act, but it has no longevity. What do I mean by that? The physical object remains a physical object, unholy. You did something that brought you as an individual closer to God, but the item didn't change. Later, after the Torah was given, sure, you take a Torah scroll, you take a hide of a cow, and you make a Torah, you make tefillin, you make a mezuzah. You take a Torah book and you print Torah words on it, now it's holy, and you got to send chayenus and put it in shemus and bury it on the ground. Physical objects can become holy, even on Shabbos. You eat a cholent on Shabbos for the sake of eating a holy thing on God's day of rest on Shabbos. The eating itself becomes a holy thing. Sinai changed that. So what happened here with circumcision? Circumcision was the first time that God said to a human being, in this case it happened to be Abraham, but it's the first time God said to a human being that you're going to take something physical and turn it into something holy. In this case, it happened to be the organ in which Abraham had the circumcision on. That organ becomes holy through circumcision. And specifically because it's an organ associated with so much unholiness that God chose that organ for an organ of holiness. But the idea that it created a foundation for the idea that something physical could become something holy. And by the way, it's different than any other mitzvah. Because when a person lights Shabbos candles or puts on tefillin or keeps kosher, it's only while they're eating food, they're keeping kosher. But when they're not eating food, they're not keeping kosher. Circumcision on a baby boy, on a Jewish baby boy, is something that remains for them with all eternity. It's a mitzvah they carry with them from the day they're circumcised till the day they die. It's an incredible mitzvah that you have every single day. When you meet a Jew who's circumcised and they say, I don't do religion, I'm saying, sorry. Your parents already gave you that mitzvah when you were 8 days old, and you carry the mitzvah wherever you go. Tough luck. Too bad on you. It's an incredible mitzvah. Avram Avinu, it was the first time that a human being, was gifted with the ability of taking something physical and turning it into something spiritual. And because of that dynamic, God made it clear that when we do physical mitzvahs, it needs to be done according to the laws of nature. We're not supposed to introduce miracles to an act that is meant to be natural, because then it defeats the purpose. The whole purpose is that we're supposed to permeate the physicality, the finite physical object, with divinity, with godliness. But if you're taking away the finite experience because you're introducing it via miracle, then it's not being done the way a mitzvah is supposed to be done. So if I said to you, you don't have to light Shabbos candles anymore, Jennifer. Miraculously, the candles in your house are going to be lit every Friday. Poof! And every Friday, the candles will be lit. It's beautiful. It's a great miracle. But it's not what God wants. God wants you to strike the match and light the candle and make the bracha. Right? Some people would say, and I've had this discussion, that the great way to keep kosher is to be vegan. Just don't have to worry about dairy and meat and anything, be vegan. And by the way, if that's your choice between that and eating treif, 100% go vegan. But there's a third option, which is don't be vegan. That's not my recommendation. I'm just saying the third option is you don't have to be vegan, but it takes a lot more work because now you have to worry about getting kosher. And how do you get kosher? And does it have fins and scales? And it was shechted properly, slaughtered properly, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more work, but it can't be miraculous. It has to be within the realm of nature because that's the point. Right? The Gemara says, well, further, the Arizal says that it says about the Arizal, the famous from Isaac Luria, the 16th century Kabbalist from Tzfat, from the holy city of Tzfat, the founder of Lurianic Kabbalah. So he says that he never bargained or negotiated about anything to do with the mitzvah, which is counterintuitive for a Jew. He never bargained. He never said, oh, can we get a discount? It's a mitzvah. Bargain about something else. Bargain about the tires. These snow tires, go bargain. Go negotiate. Good luck. How come no one negotiates about their snow tires? Because Tyrama is not negotiating. Somehow with mezuzahs, everyone's negotiating. Do I really need 12 mezuzahs? It's expensive. Deduct a half a roll of sushi every month and you'll see you'll have enough money for mezuzahs. I'm not saying to give up the sushi altogether, just deduct a half a roll once a month, right? So the Arizal never negotiated. Why? Because the mitzvahs by definition, God, and this is going to sound very harsh, God doesn't want mitzvah observance to be easy. He doesn't. It's an oxymoron. People say, oh my gosh, I'd love to do mitzvahs, but I also want it to be easy. You don't understand. They're not supposed to be easy. They're supposed to be ingrained in the realm of nature. And nature, by definition, the world is not a world of easy. What else in this world comes easy? My Bobby always said, you buy cheap, you get cheap. She used to wear coats. And she had jewelry, custom jewelry she had for 40, 50 years. She'd wear the same coat. It looked amazing. Why? Because she said, you buy cheap, you get cheap. You buy expensive, it stays around. Yiddishkeit is very much about that. Judaism understands that a mitzvah, because it's supposed to be experienced within the finite limitations of nature, it's not going to be easy. And if it's easy, if it happens miraculously, it defeats the purpose. You know, the Gemara says the Talmud in the tractate of Sukkah, it's a tractate that talks about building a sukkah on Sukkahs. And it says over there that Rabbi Gamliel, the great sage, once bought an esrog, a citron, which is one of the 4 species we use on Sukkahs. He bought it for 1,000 zuz. Why 1,000 zuz? It was an incredible price. That's what the guy was charging, and he had to get one. The Gemara says, why? So people he should appreciate how precious mitzvahs are. Right? He could have said, well, 1,000 zuz. Let's negotiate. He could have, and he'd probably be right. Especially because in his case, it sounds like the person was taking advantage of it. But there wasn't a lot of esrogim around. And he knew that a mitzvah is not supposed to come easy. It's just supposed to be a mitzvah. And so if that's the case, right? If that's the case, it's according to the natural realm, according to the world of nature, right? There's an angel called Angel Raphael, the angel of healing, like your father's name. The angel Raphael, which means refuah, healing, was one of the 3 angels that came to Abraham on this same 3rd day after the circumcision. Remember, there was 3 angels, one to let Sarah know that she's going to have a baby. Now that Abraham's been circumcised, and his name changed from Avram to Avraham. Avram means the father of Aram, the father of the Arameans. And Avraham means I've made you a ruler over all nations, that you've expanded your horizons, your energetics. And Sarah went from the name Sarai, which means my minister, to Sarah, to means the minister of all. She became the queen of all. Abraham was the king, she was the queen. And together they were this force that was now capable, because the energetic shifted to have a child. One of the angels that came on the 3rd day was the angel of Raphael, to heal. Why did the angel come to heal? If everything's supposed to be natural, the angel should have never come to heal. If he's supposed to suffer the pain of circumcision, because that's part of the experience, why didn't God let him suffer the experience? The answer is, the angel Raphael comes to all people. All people, according to the laws of nature. How do people get better? You get a cold. What happened when you got it? You think it's because you took a Z-Pack? Sure. God says go to a doctor. The doctor will give you a Z-Pack or give you a chleis, whatever they hack and vitamin C. I couldn't resist. But what's embedded in that? The angel Raphael is God's form of natural form that infuses the healing, the medical world, with the blessing. Every doctor that succeeds in a surgery is being guided in surgery by the Malach Raphael. Otherwise, the healing would never be able to take place. And if they don't succeed in surgery, it's not because the doctor's a loser, although that happens once in a while. It's mostly because, right, what did the doctor do wrong? He did everything right and it didn't work. What happened? The angel Raphael wasn't there. This wasn't meant to be, and you can't heal without Raphael. So the angel came to Avram on the 3rd day to heal him, because that is the natural order of things. That on the 3rd day, things start getting better after circumcision. God didn't want to come earlier, because had God come earlier and seen Avram suffering, he would have introduced a miraculous type of healing for him. Remember, healing comes to a patient in many forms. If God would have showed up just by God showing up in itself, Abraham would have started healing beyond the regular norm. And had he done that, then Abraham wouldn't be fulfilling the mitzvah the way God wanted it to be fulfilled. Just like the circumcision itself was the first time we imbued nature, we imbued the physical with a mitzvah, with a holy object that remained holy for all eternity, within the confines and in the limitations of nature. We made this great fusion of heaven and earth, of finite and infinite. Don't ruin it. Don't let God come early to be mevakar chayla, to do bikkur chayim, to visit the sick, because if he does that, he's going to heal Avram earlier than he should, which means Avram is going to miss out on the experience of the mitzvah, which is supposed to be painful for 3 days. And that is key here. And that is what I want to leave you with tonight. When a mitzvah hurts, doesn't mean you're supposed to run away from the mitzvah. Quite the contrary. You're supposed to pause and say, it's hurting. It must be really important for my soul to experience this the way I'm being experienced. If it doesn't hurt, right, that means it's not really being operated in the realm of nature because nature hurts. Right? That's why we say, the world says, people should give charity till it hurts. Well, what about a billionaire? He should also give charity till it hurts, because until the billionaire gives charity till it hurts, till he can know the difference, he hasn't really affected the change that the mitzvah is supposed to accomplish. And it's not just with tzedakah, it's with any mitzvah. Right? When we saw the Russian Jews come out of Russia circumcising themselves at these very old age, incredible thing. Of course, every few weeks, every few months, some yo-yo comes out in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, to explain why circumcision is the most horrendous thing for humanity, and children should get to choose when they're 18 if they should be circumcised. And I'll ask them to go on college campus and make a survey about who at the age of 18 wants to go through a circumcision, and let me know how it goes. But that's for another lecture. It's for another class. The point that I make tonight is that when you experience a mitzvah within the limitations of nature, right? You're trying to build a sukkah and it's snowing, and you do it anyhow. You work it, it's harder. You're trying to keep Shabbos, and it's hard because you finish your job at 5 o'clock, and Shabbos in a few weeks is going to start at 4 o'clock, and you have to go negotiate with the boss to get an hour off early, or someone invited you to a really important, special, super duper party. It's going to be Saturday night, but it's going to be before Shabbos ended. You really want to go because it's all the feinschmeckers, all the important people of the world are going to be. You say, you know what, I'm going to come to your party, but I'm going to be an hour late. You know what? How many people tell me they're coming to services late for a million different reasons? How about tell your bar friend or your party friend you're going to be late because God asked for your time? When it hurts, then you're doing it within the realm of nature, and you're not doing it in a miraculous form. And that is the ultimate way to fulfill a mitzvah. God's Bikr Chaylim, God visiting the sick, God visiting the sick was God on the third day, visiting Abraham on the third day was God's way of saying that I want it to hurt. I want you to experience this mitzvah in all its glory with the ups and downs, the good and bad, well, not the good and bad, the harder moments and the easier moments, because that's part of the experience. And it's really a life lesson for all of us, because so often we get caught up in I'm one of the good guys, God. Why are you making it so hard for me? Woohoo. Who should he make it hard for? People that are not the good guys? They don't care. They're not doing mitzvahs. Who should God make mitzvahs challenging for? The people that are not doing it? He has to make it challenging to those that are doing it. And you happen to be one of the lucky ones that are doing it. So God makes it hard so that you should work harder. You should invest more. You should imbue the world, the physical, material, finite, limited experience with more godliness. And who comes out stronger from that? Each and every one of us. It is not that famous quote from Dr. Seuss that I have hanging in the house. It's a long quote, but the end of the quote is, no one said it would be easy. They just said it would be worth it. God never promised us mitzvahs would be easy. You know where they have easy and free? In Egypt. It says in Egypt, the Jews ate for free. You know why? They were enslaved. Slaves eat for free, quote unquote. They work their tochazov and someone feeds them, so they don't have to actually earn their money. They're fed. Who? Do we want to be fed? Or do we want to work hard to make our own money so we can feed ourselves? Yiddishkeit is about feeding ourselves. Get to work. Mitzvahs are hard. Even Avraham Avinu, Abraham, the guy who gave everything for God, 99 years old, God says, hey, how about let's go into circumcision. Because what you were doing till now, leaving your family's home, believing in God, spreading godliness, going to Israel, going to a land you don't know, having your wife in a box in Egypt, that's not enough. Let's have a circumcision party. And I'll make it hard, and I'll make it painful. Because when you live through that, when you experience that, that is what godliness is. That is what mitzvahs are really all about. And the fact that we as Jews are able to do that and live through the mitzvahs and live with the mitzvahs is because our founding father and mother experienced that and went through that. And they gifted us, each and every one of us in our DNA, that we too, when we get a mitzvah that's hard, we don't say, oh, it's hard. The hell with it. It's hard. I don't want to daven in an airport. I don't want to buy the expensive flight on Sunday. I want to buy the cheap one on Saturday, on Shabbos. I don't want to light a menorah. My whole block in this part of Bozeman is all Christmas trees. I should be the idiot with a menorah. And if I light a menorah, can I just do it? I have to let everyone know? Maybe I could put a Christmas tree and block the window and then put the menorah behind so no one should see. And matzah, I mean, I get it for one day, but 8 days you want me to stay away from eating pizza? How could you survive 8 days without pizza?
There's matzah pizzas.
Oh, very good. I'm glad you mentioned that, so people should know. That's what it's about. And to the person who asked me on Facebook, but circumcision's on the 8th day so that it shouldn't hurt, that's not true. That's not why it's on the 8th day. It's on the 8th day because we want a child to be physically able to undergo the circumcision, while at the same time be totally, it should be totally it should not be his choice at all. It should be a super rational experience that he grows up with, that is embedded into him, that's unrelated to his choice. Because the minute it's a choice, then it's not about God commanding you, it's about you making a choice of what's good for you, and that's about you, not about God. And mitzvahs, by definition, are not supposed to be about us. They're supposed to be about the commander, not the recipient. And so let's make this week, this month, a time in which we, there's no holidays this month of Cheshvan. There's no Yom Tovs. Some would say thank God, some would say Oivei, but either way, there's no holidays. So it's a month of day-to-day activity. How do I incorporate godliness in my day-to-day, in the mundane experience, so that I can find God within the limitations of nature, within those finite physical experiences, so that I could uplift our world out of its coarseness, out of its obsession with physicality and materialism, and uplift it to a place of spirituality and godliness, the ultimate of which will come with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu may be speedily in our days. Amen. Just a reminder, in about 2 weeks, I think it's November 4th or so, we're starting our new course, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. It's going to be a 4-week lunchtime course here at the shul, a JLI course, Jewish Learning Institute. We're going to go back to doing some JLI, but during lunch hour, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. Right? Not the typical ADL response. There's a Torah response. We're Jews. Everything needs to be responded to like a Jew. So sign up for the course. If you don't know how to sign up, I don't care where you live, you can watch it on Zoom. It'll be recorded. So you can send me a message on Facebook or privately on email for a link to sign up. You don't want to miss it. 4 weeks out, Smarting Anti-Semitism. Have a fantastic rest of the week. Margot, Chagai, Jim, Yaakov, Valerie, good to see you. It's great to have you on. Kayla Gittel, Karen, and all of you watching on Facebook. Sei gesund, hasta la vista, and I'll see you back here soon. Sei gesund.
Okay, before I'm going to bring up a point about soul and mitzvah, but just 2 quick notes. When we talk about, people say, circumcision in the secular world, and it's all